I've been napping in a hammock that I washed by hand 'cause it smelled like animal feces. I set it up for a German boy who left and went back to Berlin, and I haven't used it very much until I washed it, and then I started using it, and I took a long, long, long nap. I'm gonna turn around so you can see the waves behind me, but I just noticed the time and I thought, hey, let's tell some stories from a hammock. Hello, Joseph. Hello, Kenny. Love the togu. I love the tongue too. I was starting it because of the great lassitude of heat here. It is funny that when one is not, I'm not a fan of air conditioning, and I do like heat. But the heat-humidity thing, it does make one want to lay around and do very little. Maybe just listening to the sound of the waves. Like, I don't even need to hear music. I just lay here. I had a very nice long nap. I had a nice morning talking to people, and I don't know if I could remember the entire chain of events, but it, ended up telling this story about being gay in high school, and so there's a cafe here that people meet up at, and there's a communal table in a very European way. Like, the idea there are separate tables if you want to sit separately. Like, Americans like to sit separately. And then there's a communal table, so you can have breakfast. He is only open for breakfasty lunch. He closes at like 1 or 2 something. I don't know what time he opens in the morning, like 7. But he makes a really delicious breakfast. When I arrived, everybody said, this is the best breakfast place. Anyway, everybody here was supposed to close for pandemic and allow only takeout food. A lot of you have been dealing with that reality. But this weird little town that I'm in, which is famous for its freedom or whatever, didn't do that so much. I mean, a lot of the restaurants did close, and he put up a sign that said para llevar, which means takeaway only, solo para llevar. But a lot of people just would go in there anyway, and he had a very limited menu, just like coffee and cupcakes and stuff. And as the weeks have progressed, where the idea of protecting each other from the pandemic has just been withering in the heat, like everything else, it's just become a social scene again. And I've gone a few mornings. This morning, one of the friends I walked to town with yesterday brought back some shopping for me. And I went there to meet him, and then I asked the proprietor of the restaurant if he was doing his famous sweet and salty breakfast again, which he does like a deep-fried French toast. Have you ever had a deep-fried French toast? It's just like sliced baguette soaked in egg, and I don't know, it's golden brown and crispy on the outside. It's amazing. And he does really good potatoes with fresh rosemary. And anyway, I don't remember exactly how this started. There's a kid here. I think it's about how there's a kid here. There's a couple kids here from New York. So it's been very interesting to be here and like see the Brooklyn kids, right? There's not like standard hipsters here, I would say. But there was this conversation this morning of how like the people who ended up here have to a certain degree said fuck society. And they live their lives in such a way that says fuck society, not necessarily in a face tattoo kind of way or rock music, but just like living your life in a, suburbs and 9-to-5 jobs. I don't think that's going to work for me. And so we ended up here during this. And some of them are from Brooklyn. There is a couple who I have not interacted with directly very much. One of them I've only seen from a distance, and the other one I have been around him at parties, which I've only gone to one party, and at the cafe a few times. But he's never talked to me, and I have not addressed him. And, I have openly talked about being prejudiced with the people at the cafe. there was a dude from Brooklyn who is an Israeli Jew who grew up in Israel, right, and moved to Brooklyn, and he has a lot of intense opinions, which he proclaims and intensely interacts with. And after having a conversation with him, we had a little discussion about what we thought it meant when he said something. And I said, because I have lived in New York a long time and I have interacted with a lot of Israeli Jews over my years, I took what he said to mean one thing, and this other guy thought that he meant something else, and they said, well, I don't know, why did you take it like that? And I was like, because he's an Israeli Jew who lives in Brooklyn and he has a whole like worldview that I can just assume. And they're like, but that's prejudice. And I'm like, yeah, that's what the mind does all the time. It's constantly prejudging things based on past experiences, and hopefully a conscious mind will look at that and make some other choices about those prejudices. I mean, our minds are making prejudices all the time. It doesn't mean you have to unconsciously believe in them. However, you're using them. You're constantly using your unconscious prejudices to interact and have conversations and make statements. Oh, don't worry, I'll get back in the hammock in a minute. I'm not working too hard. I just had to fetch my other phone so I can use the story list if indeed I want to get to that story. But instead I'm telling stories from today. Unless you guys ask me any questions about anything specific, and then maybe we'll get into something else. Anyway, but there's these two guys from Brooklyn that I haven't interacted with, though I have interacted with the Israeli Jew and had conversations with him. It's been with a certain amount of caution, because I know that, like, I've seen him have intense interactions with other people. He's a very friendly guy, so I'm not gonna, but but I'm like, I don't want to trigger him in any way. I have a tendency to be able to trigger people. May not surprise you. See, this is the view that I was looking. This is why I was laying the other way, so that I could look at this. But for the good of the viewing population, I'm going to lay this way. I hope this rocking doesn't make you too nauseous. But at least you can see what I was laying in the hammock looking at. Anyway, so these two guys that I haven't interacted with are queer. Let's say, I was going to say gay. Let's say they are queer African-American men. And at least one of them, because I haven't interacted directly with the other one, is born in New York City. So I've seen him, like, he's like a lot of my friends from New York, he's like in dress-up mode all the time. He's very loud and charismatic. And every time he's looked at me, he's kind of energetically. And so I'm like, okay, that's cool. I don't need to interact with that. If he wants to interact with me, he can. But I've seen him do it ostensibly to other people, like verbally. And I've just seen him do it like where he'll like make a read and glaze away. And I'm like, that's cool. I don't need to interact with that. That's awesome. I don't need to tell him that I've also lived in Brooklyn and faced this gauntlet of judgments. But we were talking today about how a big part of how I've shaped my life, or especially when I was younger, was to confuse people. I really loved confusing people, and it's a story that I don't think it's on my list of stories to tell, because it's not about what I take my spiritual view of the world to be. But when I was a teenager in high school, I was kind of a goth. I'd wear like blouses and sometimes skirts, lots of black and makeup and stuff. And I would, sometimes people would come up to me and they'd be like, hey, Nick, I heard you're gay, man. Are you gay? And it's understandable, like, if you're in a small town in the Midwest and you know somebody and you don't know any gay people, you're like, maybe I could ask this person who I kind of know. and maybe he's gay, and maybe I could learn something. Maybe that was their intention, but I was just afraid of being put in a box. So this happened a few times in high school, that if somebody came up to me and he said, "Hey, are you gay? I heard some people were saying you were gay. Are you gay?" And I would always respond something like this: "Oh, no, I wouldn't say I was gay. I mean, I do like to suck cock, and I'm practicing. I'm getting pretty good at it. Is that why you're asking me? Did you want me to suck your cock?" And they'd be like, "No, I was just, wait a minute. You just said you weren't gay, though." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm not gay." And then why would you? No, I wasn't. And I was like, "Well, I mean, it doesn't really matter if I'm gay unless you want me to suck your cock. I mean, is it an action thing? Is that what you're asking? Like, do you want to try? What, you trying to put me in some kind of box so you can understand me, or you want me to perform an action?" Like, it was very. I don't think it was the kindest. I don't know. I don't think it was necessarily the kindest way to respond to these questions, but I didn't have the compassion to understand that these were just people trying to make sense of the world and thinking that I might be a safe option. But I was not a safe option at that point, so, yeah. And it was also just part of, like, I don't want to be put in boxes. Nobody wants to be put in boxes. However, we are constantly being put in boxes and putting people in boxes ourselves. So it's been interesting to interact with the kids here as things are opening. There's a kid who bought a bus in Toronto, a city bus, and converted it into a living space and drove it down to here over a 2-year period of time, living in different places along the way in the United States and Mexico, and repeatedly converting the bus into a house, into a cafe, into a restaurant, into a hostel, into an Airbnb property. And right now he's thinking of converting it into a travel experience for some of us who would help pay for gas, because he would like to go to the Yucatan and explore the cenotes and the ancient ruins, which was the main reason I came to Mexico this year and haven't done yet. So my flight to return to America got canceled with a full refund, although I haven't checked to see yet if I've received that refund. They said it would take a week, so I'll look when the week is up. But if that is the reality, and that actually happens, in the next few weeks I may be going on a bus trip with kids from this town that I have made friends with. Oh, that phrase kids, I referenced it yesterday about a kid that I interacted with here who was 45, and he was like, "How old is this guy you're talking about?" And I said, "Oh, 45. And he said, "Kid." And this person I was talking to was 25. And I was like, yeah, when I say kids, I pretty much refer to anybody of any age, because I've always noticed that most people pretty much take the kind of things they learned at the age of like 5 and run with it for the rest of their lives, like on emotional, psychological terms. They're just like, yeah. But in a not so negative way, I think that no matter what age you are, no matter what age any of us are, we all have an aspect that's just a kid, that's just exploring, that's just trying to have fun, that's just trying to understand. And we're all kids, and it's okay. You know, we're making mistakes, we're having fun, we're testing out things. And so we're kids. It's okay to be kids. And so if I go on this bus trip with these kids from here, no matter what age they are, it'd be a nice kind of transition into us, you know, having gone through this ordeal together and then moving on with our lives. Yeah, you're definitely a kid, Connor. And you're also a daddy, which is problematic, because I'm sure you don't, that does not seem at all to be your psychology, except, you know, from what I've heard, you're the one who does the work sometimes. So you're daddy, and you're just a little boy. I'm just a little boy. We're all like that, it's okay. Anyway, so I like the idea of going on this like trip with these other kids because we're all going to move on. We're all travelers. The reason we ended up in this town is because we're travelers and we were curious, or we've been here before, or we wanted to be here, and then it's just where the shit hit the fan and we stopped here. So yeah, it'll be interesting if we get to go on this trip together and get to see some new things, and then like I fly off out of Cancun, which I don't want to spend any time in Cancun, but there are direct flights back to New York City from Cancun that are cheap and direct and faster than Mexico City, and I don't have to deal with these little airports that are completely unreliable around here, which is why my flight got canceled. Not the Mexico City leg, but the flights from here to Mexico City, which often get canceled. So I don't know. It's just interesting to think of like, where do we go from here? There's always that idea, where do we go from here? And especially in this situation where we're in a more ostensibly I don't know kind of reality. We all have the I don't know. So does anybody have any requests about reality right now, or stories from my life, or weird pointless Dominic opinions on current events, which I wouldn't really recommend because I try not to stay too educated on current events because it's maddening to do so. I spent a little bit of time reading about Amari today, and that was just like, so I don't know if I need to talk about that. I wouldn't recommend that I'm somebody that should be talking about that. No, I haven't booked a flight. Frank, the flight that I booked to fly out of here through Puerto Escondido to Mexico City to Miami to New York got canceled with a full refund. Thom, I did not sleep on the beach. Well, I did sleep for 2 hours on the beach. The sand was incredibly hot from the sun it had absorbed, and I was a sweaty, itchy mess when I woke up 2 hours after napping. And my friend that I was with, he couldn't sleep at all. He laid there, and then he just got up and started training martial arts and qigong, and he intended to train all night. And I thought, you know, what would be kinder to him and to me is to not put ourselves through this ordeal, but just walk back to our homes, our rented rooms. And if we walk back to our rented rooms, you know, it'll only take an hour and a half or so. Where will you return to? I'll answer that in a second, Robert. The exciting thing about the walk back last night was a lot of the stretch of the beach, there were no lights and no hotels, and something about the salt water as it settles in the sand feeds a bioluminescent microorganism, probably some kind of plankton. I know phytoplankton are bioluminescent. I've encountered them in water. I don't know if phytoplankton live in sand, but I've encountered it here on the beach here. But it was much better last night because we had to walk on the beach for a few miles, and a lot of it was in the pitch black, and our feet were glowing. And I don't mean like in a super like CGI kind of way, but there was it was really cool to like kick up sand and watch it scatter little specks of light across the blackness. That was a really, and he'd never seen it at all. And he's a total stoner, so he was like, "Whoa!" You know, he was flipping out. And I had seen it here, but again, it was just a totally different experience to have it be organic and just like, I'm walking in the dark. Oh, look, there's Saturn rising, and it's dark, dark red because of the horizon. And then watching the ground speckle with these little turquoise luminescent pips. It was really cool. And then when I got back, I was tired as and a little burnt, as you can see. So I cut a aloe vera. There's aloe vera everywhere here. Cut aloe vera and smeared it all over my body. And then I have a couple different painkiller salves. I bought a painkiller salve yesterday made by somebody around here, or maybe not even around here, because it says Producto de Nayarit, which is another state somewhere else. But the salve is made with raccoon and possum fat with extracts of marijuana and peyote and arnica and calendula, which, are more common things to hear about. Marijuana in salves has been heard about frequently, but I'd never encountered a peyote salve, and I'd certainly never encountered a salve made with raccoon and possum fat, but it talked about how good those animal fats help the constituents absorb deeply into the body. And it said it was specifically for rheumatoid arthritis, of which my mother sometimes suffers, so I loved the idea of being able to give her a salve made with peyote, marijuana, possum, and raccoon. What? But that's not the salve I used last night. The salve I used last night has castor oil and olive oil and beeswax, and also marijuana and datura, which is thornapple, Jimson weed, if you know that, which can stop your heart, but is also really good to open your lungs and I guess soften muscle pain, soften muscle pain. So that was very nice. I rubbed my knees, I rubbed my feet, I rubbed my ankles, I rubbed my neck because I was wearing a backpack. And I got some delicious chocolate spread and dates. And my oh my, is it a hot, relaxing day. Siestas in the middle of the day without air conditioning. But I don't like air conditioning, so that's my fate. Do I have any other interesting stories to tell that are current? Oh, yeah, so for those of you who watched any or some of the live video from last evening, we went out to the southernmost point, which is a peninsula that stretches out from the southernmost point of Mexico, and tried to watch the sunset because the coast curves up to the north there, so you can still see the sunset over the sea. However, there were clouds that kind of blocked it. And a girl showed up who used the old Aztec word for flower for her name, Xochitl, and she studied Tai Chi and martial arts and Reiki. Not really Qigong, she didn't use that word, but she was like kind of a shaman person. And so we all practiced our own version of Qi work last night while the sun was setting, while I occasionally talked to people on camera. Hi guys, what's going on? And then when it actually got dark, she offered to do healing work on both of us, just like an intuitive healing work thing. It was really cool. And he gave her a bud. I didn't have a bud. Lo siento, no fumo. Every day people ask me for cigarettes. Lo siento, no fumo. No fumo. Thank you for sharing your story. You know how it is when you are familiar with someone and yet kind of intimidated by their character type. And you might be like, I may admire your existence, but have no reason or need to interact with it, and wouldn't necessarily know what to do in a good way that would be entertaining to you. Some people are existing in, actually a lot of us, I'm actually one of them, I'm existing in a constant state of entertainment as a social interaction form, meaning like I like to be quiet and alone, and I like to be silent, but I also like to stare at the internet and watch movies and read books. Entertainment. But as many of you know, I spend a good portion of my time creating entertainment or content as well. So I tend to feel more comfortable interacting with people when I am providing content or entertainment or service, education, etc. And there are certain people who are a walking party, or at least that's their public persona. Like when they're around other people, they're loud and colorful and snarky and charismatic and all these things. And people like that kind of intimidate me because I'm just like, I don't know if I want to show up at this party. I don't know if I want to be a part of this party. So I haven't interacted with this kid from Brooklyn, but it's been interesting to interact with all of these people from New York that are here and have them be around me and be like, New York. You can take the boy out of New York, but you can't take the New York out of the world that is everywhere. And so when I arrived at this town, it was like 80% Canadians, like snowbirds everywhere. And I was just like, wow, this is like a whole Canadian Channel bubble that I just found myself in. And it turns out there was a little strand of Brooklyn here too. So it's been interesting that as the Canadians, most of them, have peeled off and gone back home, there's a larger percentage of Brooklyners who have stayed here because, like, Canadians could go back to a country maybe that's not so crazy and has a lot more space to chill the fuck out. And New Yorkers are like, fuck no, I'm not going to leave a nude beach town and to go back to New York when it's cold and totally insane on the brink of, like, apocalyptical collapse, which we don't know if that's true, but it's certainly there in the anxiety shelves. What's in your anxiety catalog today? What could be? Maybe that. It's nice if you have the habit of mind instead to be like, something amazing might happen. Wow, what amazing thing might happen? I've heard that they're shutting off streets from cars so just pedestrians and bicyclists can use it. I love that. And then somebody sends you a text and says, oh yes, 20 more miles of streets in New York City were just made open streets. And I'm like, oh, see, that makes me happy. It's happy to know that. So, but there's not a word for that when you have hopeful, imaginary feelings about the future. But we do have a word when you have fearful imaginations about the future, and that word is anxiety. Anyway, enough about that. Just to talk for a little bit, I can roll a random number, or one of you can shout out a number between 1 and 148. Try to make it as random as possible, not square, although a square number is okay, but don't choose 25 because it's already been chosen and spoken twice. And then I'll look it up in my list. Or I will roll the random number generator. Shit. Hey. Okay, we have 3. Stop. Thank you. Hi, guys. That was quick. Thank you. Strange. Where are you? Oh, that's probably what's going on. Are you looking in notes or all notes? You have to look in all notes. See, again, I like that all of you chose a number with 7 in it. What's that about? On 17. What's today's date? Is today's date something 7? Nope. It's not. Frank Martin dials up 117, which I apparently have not told in any of these records. The title for it in my list here is Sannyasi on Route 9. Once upon a time. So I dated a professional artist for 3 years. Theoretically, I don't date people, and I was trying something new of, like, maybe I could love somebody and not try to live with them, and maybe the relationship wouldn't collapse under the same weight had been destroying all my other relationships at that point. I was age 25, I think. I met him at a sex party in New York City. I thought he was amazing. I was so attracted to him. I didn't know he was an artist. Certainly didn't know he was a professional artist, internationally known amongst people who know conceptual artists. And our relationship lasted like 3 years, and then we hardly interact anymore. However, he had a history with Rhinecliff University, upstate New York, Hudson Valley. So we were up there at a house that a friend gave him to use for the summer so that he could work on some projects away from the city. And I thought, I'll do some writing. And unfortunately, I do a lot of writing sometimes, but whenever I set out to be like, I'm going to do some writing, it's very rare that I actually do. And I'm not going to say never, because a couple of years ago I did go put myself on a writing retreat and actually put out a few good writings. The winter of 2017 writings. That was a specific, I'm going to go put myself on a writing retreat, and I achieved adequately successful results. But this time I didn't. I actually remember playing a lot of solitaire on my flip phone. What year was this? This was before iPhones. This was 2005. The summer of 2005. I lived in New York City somewhat. It's the first time I ever paid rent in an apartment in New York City, and was gone more than I was there. I held the apartment for 10 months and I think was gone a total of like 6 of those months. One of the times I was gone, I was upstate New York along the Hudson. Yeah, but don't say his name on here, Frank. I know you know who he is. I'm being discreet. He's a public figure. So we were together for a while up there, and he had some stuff going on, and I had massage clients and some other events going on. So we were leaving separately, and he didn't know how to drive, but he had friends who were going to drive him back down, and I decided to take the Amtrak. Now, I have heard that the Amtrak in the United States, I had not taken it very much. I still have not taken the Amtrak very much, because I continually hear that the Amtrak is a total fucking nightmare, in that it's always late and it's a mess and blah, blah, blah. So he had one of his friends drop me off at the Amtrak station, because there was a scheduled train that would get me into New York City. And they dropped me off at the Amtrak station, and I walked inside, and there was a big sign that said, the 6:30 train to Pennsylvania Station is 6 hours late, or 3 hours late, or something insane like that. And I was like, fuck, I can be in New York City quicker than, I'm not going to like wait here. And I didn't want to go back and be at the house with him. I didn't want to stay there the night. I needed to be back in New York City the next day anyway, so I didn't want to call somebody to come, call him to call his friend to get me to, So it's like, I can just try to hitchhike. And so I left the Amtrak station, I didn't look on a Google map. I guess I knew the state roads and the country roads enough that I was like, if I can get over to Route 9, I'll be much more likely to get a ride that will lead me into Poughkeepsie at least. And then from Poughkeepsie, I don't need to rely on the Amtrak. I can get the Metro North, which is a local commuter train, right? So I start walking on these country roads. And again, it's not super late at night. It's summer, so the sun's setting late. And it's like 6, it's probably 6 or something. And I think like right away, some kids drove by and picked me up and drove me over to Route 9. And I was like, this is great. This is going to work wonderfully. No problem. So they were going north. So they dropped me off on Route 9, and I started walking south on Route 9. And nobody fucking stopped to pick me up. I walked for like an hour and a half walking south. And this is before I'd done the Camino. So I was just like, oh my God, I'm walking so much. And I had a like very small backpack, and my hair was up in a top knot on the top of my head. You guys know what a sannyasi is? So a sannyasi is an Indian term. I don't know what language it is. I don't know if it's Sanskrit or some other. But it means a renunciant. Someone who has renounced the ways of the world, the worldly world, renounced sensual pleasures and objects, and goes out to wander around and live as a spiritual being. Wearing my hair on the top of my head in a top knot, I started doing because I saw girls doing it, hippie girls in California, and I thought it was a really superior way of keeping my hair out of my face when it's hot, because it doesn't trap the hair on the neck like a ponytail does, or even a bun at the back of the head, which a lot of people wear their hair like that. So they were hippie girls who had spent time in India, so they probably got it from there. But I wore it like that many years before I had any inclination or any idea that it was an Indian thing. And it was something that, like, generally dreadlocked sadhus would do. They would tie their gigantic ropes of hair into big balls on the top of their head. And it's called a top knot, and it has some kind of association with spirituality, like you're flowering your crown chakra. So I have my hair in a top knot. I'm walking down Route 9. It's getting really close to sunset. I'm enjoying the rolling farm fields and the cows and the goats. But, I'm mostly just walking through farmland. There's like fucking nothing. And there's hardly any cars. And the cars that are going by are not stopping and picking me up. I've never really had a lot of luck with hitchhiking. It's always been really frustrating to me. Mainly because I think most Americans read me as a drug addict or axe murderer or something because of the big beard and long hair. And Americans are a very fearful bunch generally. And especially, hitchhiking used to be something that Americans did, and then there was this big smear campaign against it, like, you're going to get raped or kidnapped or something by your hitchhiker, and so Americans became afraid. So I'm walking, and I'm tired and I'm kind of hungry, and all of a sudden I come upon a house by the side of the road, like a nice little old house that was probably 100-something years old. And it had a sign out front of it stating that it was an Indian restaurant. And I thought, what are the fucking odds on this, like, rural Route 9 north of New York City that there's an Indian restaurant in the middle of nowhere surrounded by farm fields? What luck. I would love some gulab jamun. I would love some samosas and a what's the word? I used to drink the mango lassi. I used to drink mango lassis a lot. I mean, if you've ever fallen in love with Indian food, you've probably fallen in love with mango lassis. So I thought, I'm going to pop into this Indian restaurant and get a couple samosas and a mango lassi, and at least, it'll take a break from the walking and recharge the energy tanks, as it were. So I walk in and the Indian dude walks up to me looking like he's seen a fucking ghost. He's like, and I say, hey there, are you guys open? And he's like, yes. And he mumbles something, and I'm like, what? And he said, yes, please come in, take a seat. And I'm like, oh, I would just like some samosas and mango lassi to go. And he was like, oh, of course, please sit down. I was like, okay. And he puts out a little tablecloth on a table right next to the door. Like, he doesn't invite me into the restaurant because I tell him that I want something to go, I assume. And he puts down a little tablecloth, and he says, just sit here, I'll bring you some water. And he brings me some water. And then he brings out this gigantic plate of food after a pretty short period of time and says, this is a chicken biryani. It is something from our country. It's very good. We'd like you to have it. It's on the house. And I was like, but I just wanted to... He was like, no, please. And I was like, okay. So I sit and I eat the chicken biryani, and I'm like, I've heard stories there's a lot of different cultures that have these stories of, like, what if Jesus shows up at your house? Will you let him in? Will you feed him? Will you be a good host? And treat him with hospitality. Like, that's a big thing in a lot of cultures. So there's ideas like, what if a fairy shows up? What if a god shows up? What if a saint shows up? In lots of different cultures they have this. And I realized that they've taken me as a sannyasi because I'm wandering along a nowhere road with a very small backpack and my hair's tied up in a top knot on my head. And they just read me as, like, this is maybe like Shiva or Vishnu manifest in a human form, and if you feed him, then you'll get blessings. It's a cultural thing, and I know that it's transcultural, but I'd never been the recipient. Like, I'd never been the angel at someone's table, as some phrases I've heard people. There's a book called That, An Angel at My Table. Homeless people show up and you feed them because maybe they're an angel. It's Gabriel in disguise or something. So I'm eating this food with this awareness and feeling uncomfortable. And at the same time, like, what do I do? Like, do I mention this, that I'm aware of this? Do I pretend that this gives me some kind of power? Or do I access a type of power that I may have to bless these people? Like, what is my responsibility? Especially if I'm aware of this. Like, what is my responsibility to fulfill my part of the bargain? Or is this something that I'm a pawn? Is this something that I am some kind of I don't need to do anything, that like maybe there is a god using me as a pawn in their story, and all I need to do is fulfill it by eating their offering and being grateful and not saying anything and walk on. So I kind of chose that, to be aware of it but not point it out to them. However, against my against all of these thoughts, instinctually, as I thanked them and I offered to pay them and they wouldn't let me pay them, I was like, oh, I was like, thank you so much, you know. And I walked out, and then I stood there and I was like, oh shit, but I wanted samosas and a mango lassi. So I popped back in and I was like, oh, did you make me samosas and a mango lassi? And they were like, oh, of course, sir. Oh, please. And I was like, can I give you some money for that? And they were like, oh, sure. Okay, yeah, you know. And I felt like, did that ruin the whole thing? They had like given me this offering as a saint, as like a wandering Indian saint. And then I was like, yeah, but I just wanted samosas and a mango lassi. Like, I'm just a white guy. What was I? I was like 25 at that point. But it was one of the first times outside of gay culture, outside of radical fairy culture, that I felt myself embodying a being, like a multidimensional being, like a god or a deity or a saint, that I didn't know the name of. I didn't understand the cultural intricacies of, but yet I kind of understood what was happening. So I tried to embody. And I can't say it gave me any special powers, and I would certainly love to tell this story of the god at Amma's, but I don't know if it's on the list, and maybe I'll tell it later. Maybe I should just tell it, and maybe I'll just tell this right now, and I'll have to look it up on the list and mark it off. So another like version of this kind of thing that's a little bit more embodied. So there is this woman who, I don't know how to say her Indian name. She goes by the name Amma, which just means mother or mom. And she travels around the world holding these big conventions that are free, meaning anyone who wants to can go. But there are lots of things for sale and donation boxes everywhere, much churchy, you know. But she rents out incredibly expensive places like convention centers and big hotels, or like the smaller rooms in the Javits Center and stuff. And her shtick is that she hugs people. So like a mother, she hugs people and gives them darshan through motherly love. Darshan is an Indian term that means meeting. And what it specifically refers to when it's used in this kind of context, in the airport hangar, like Quonset hut thing that they sometimes have car shows and stuff. It's in the north end of the Javits Center. It's not. I've still never been in the main part of the Javits Center. Anyway, a darshan in this context, when you have like a guru, she's considered to be an enlightened being. I believe she was like a poor woman, you know, like many people in India. She was just like a poor woman from a village, and then people started noticing that she was an avatar of Kali or something, and she just gained fame and power over the years because she could heal people through her love and her manifestation of Kali. Kali is a female avatar of Shiva that is wrathful. So it's a wrathful deity, a female wrathful deity who frees you from your ego constraints by ripping your head off and drinking the blood out of the skull. Or your enemies. But specifically like in a motherly way, she's like a tough love mom who's like, honey, I love you and you're acting like a fucking idiot because you believe in your ego too much, so I'm going to cut your head off and drink the blood out of your head. You know, we all worship different gods. And she has become like a fucking billionaire, traveling the world for 30 or 40 years now, giving hugs to millions and millions of people. And I had heard about her when I was traveling around in my younger years, but when I was in my late 20s, living in New York City in like 2000, what year would have this been? 2009, maybe? 2010? She came to New York and somebody said, "Oh, you've got to get a hug from Amma." And although I'd always been anti-guru before this. Oh, I forgot to explaining Darshan. Darshan is when you believe somebody is enlightened, whatever that means, and they meet you in enlightenment. So this could be through a conversation, this could be through a kiss, this could be through a ritualistic thing like drinking wine, like the idea of, to a certain degree, what is it called, the Eucharist in Christianity, when you eat the body and drink the blood. It's a darshan where you're kind of you're meeting Jesus in his enlightenment, and you're at that moment being enlightened in the same way Jesus is enlightened. But her enlightenment is through love. Her whole channel is through love. So even though she's an avatar for Kali Ma, who's, as I said, kind of violent, she shares enlightenment by giving you a hug. And people had mentioned to her for years, and I was like, no, I'm not into shit like that. But when I was living in New York and starting to get really depressed, somebody had told me that she was coming to town, and I was like, oh, well, she's here, and I don't have to travel. I don't have to get in a car. Maybe I'll go experience her. And I waited for hours, because that's a lot about what it's about. You get a little token, and then you have to wait hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours for your token number to come up. And then you wait in line once your token number comes up, and then you get hugged by her. And it really didn't do anything for me. It was very underwhelming. I was like, okay, yeah, it's the Indian guru show. It's like, I just kind of took it as like, hey, in India, if you don't want to be a rock star or a Bollywood star and you want to be famous, you just are spiritual and people think you're amazing. Kind of like, and this was before Kumari came out, but I just had that. Even though I'm a spiritual person, religion I'm allergic to, and my allergy to religion used to be a lot worse. So I went to the experience, had whole hours, and I thought that the experience at the event, like the market, all the crystals and the herbs and shit for sale, and just the other weirdos that showed up there, that it was fun, but it didn't do anything for me spiritually. But the next year, I went back with two of my friends, one of whom was a total stoner, and this must have been 2011, because I had a bunch of marijuana oil. So it was after Leo had started to die of cancer, and I had gotten a bunch of marijuana and made all this oil out of it. And I went to the Amma thing really stoned, because I was intending to just meet up with my two friends who wanted to do the Amma thing and hang out with them in the Indian circus aspect of it, but only stay for a couple of hours and then leave. And while I was there, a friend of mine who has lived his entire life with gurus, like he is Italian, Greek, American, he's very tall and skinny, totally covered in tattoos, grew up in like an Indian cult type reality, in a good way. I mean, not a bad way. Sometimes when you say cult, that was also part of the conversation we had this morning, is like, this boy grew up in a cult. I don't know the name of it, but it was very controlling. I was like, all of us grew up in cults. We all grew up in different types of cults. But there are some cults that are a little bit more crazy. But all cults are pretty crazy, actually. Our culture is really crazy. Hi, gorgeous. Somebody just said hi, gorgeous to me, so I was hi, gorgeous and came back. So I'm there, I think it's at the Roseland Ballroom when it still existed in New York. I remember we were upstairs. I was stoned. I don't know if they were stoned. He was teaching me mudras. It was really fun. And then this friend of mine who grew up in cults showed up, and he started talking, and he's a really cool guy. And I'm like, da-da-da-da-da-da. And he said, so are you getting a hug from Amma? And I was like, no, I have to leave in like an hour and a half. I'm catching a jitney out to the Hamptons. I'm going to go hang out with a friend at his sister's house. I think this is one of the first times I ever went out to Tony's sister's house. My good friend in New York City, Tony, his sister has a house out of it. It's not really the Hamptons, it's Sag Harbor, but I guess that's the Hamptons. Sag Harbor area, let's say that. But it's a beautiful place. And I had never been out there, but I was going to take a bus out there, and they were going to pick me up. Probably was not a good idea for me to be stoned, but again, I was very depressive at that point. And he's like, "Oh, but you have to get a hug from Amma." And I was like, it's really not important to me. I didn't want to say to him, I don't believe in her whole magic shtick or her whole enlightenment thing. I don't really care. And he was like, "No, you have to get a hug from Amma." And I was like, "Well, it just takes hours and I just can't." He was like, "Look, I'm working the line this year so I can fast track you." And I was like, "Okay, you can fast track me? Okay, fine." So he takes me up to the line, he talks to one of his friends, and they just like open the... When you are waiting for hours and hours with these tokens, you stand in a line for a while, and then you sit down in chairs and you move musical chairs up closer until you get to her, and then she hugs you. And part of the reason for that is some people, when they get close to her, just in her energy vortex, they pass out from the intense energy. This actually happens. So that's why they have them sitting in chairs as they get closer. Maybe it's also just because it's easier to control. I don't know. And then usually after she hugs you, then you sit in a chair somewhere near her, behind her or something. So you can kind of meditate close to the guru in her energy field. But, he understood that I was short on time. Again, I was stoned. And they opened a space in the chairs for me to sit down in the chair line. And as he sat me down, he was like, "Oh yeah, poor dear, she's doing all this. She's still hugging, millions of people, and she's got a cold." And of course, nowadays with our social distancing, we could think like how irresponsible of her to hug millions of people with a cold. But my response to her was like, "Oh my God, what a good person." Like, it was just, my heart just kind of blossomed for her. And I'm like, what a good person that she's totally putting her needs aside. Even though she's tired and she's sick, she's still fulfilling people's desires to be hugged and cared for, and doing whatever it is she does, which was a very personal thing. When she hugs you, she's like a chubby lady. She's a Zoftig mama. And she kind of hugs you against her breasts, but not necessarily right in her breast, but some people right in her breast. But she hugs you in her soft, voluptuous body and kind of murmurs in your ear. She always asks what your native language, or the handlers always ask what your native language is so she can speak to you in your native language. And I only know that because my friend Jorge's, his native language is Spanish, so she changes what she says to speak to him. But the first time I thought she just said "Madula, Madula, Madula," and I thought it was something in Indian. But then somebody's like, "No, she's saying my darling, my darling, my darling." Like, she's really trying to manifest this mother energy. So as I'm moving closer to her, I think like, oh, she's sick and she's tired and she's doing all this work for all these people, trying to bring them peace and comfort. So I decided to try to share healing energy with her, and I connected with, I don't know if any of you have ever done Reiki, performed Reiki, but like a lot of the way that I think of Reiki is like connecting to an infinite energy source and let it flow through me, either from above and below or behind or within or whatever, and flow out to a person. So I open up this Reiki channel and I start beaming light and healing at her, which I have to say that when I did that while being stoned, and she's a really powerful energy being, it felt really powerful to like beam energy at her and be like, wow, this feels, wow. And I was in this meditative state. I was trying to do healing work on her, and then it came up my time, and they pushed me on the floor, and I like kneeled and hobbled over to her, and she hugged me and said, "My darling, my darling, my darling," or whatever she said. And then I got up, and my friend who was working the line pulled me out of the hands, because you stagger around, all these people are pushing you. He pulled me out of the hands of the woman, and he's like, no, he doesn't need to sit down. He's fine. He's in a hurry. He's got to go. And again, the year I had done this before really did nothing for me. So I was like, whatever, I'm going to be fine. But marijuana, cannabis, is also sacred to Shiva, right? In India, there's a whole bunch of things that are sacred to Shiva. But cannabis is considered a sacrament to Shiva. And especially, there's some cultures in India that there are elaborate rituals of worshiping marijuana as a way of worshiping Shiva. And of course, the smoking of it is a way of unifying with Shiva and all this stuff. And the god that is associated with this woman, Amma, is, like, as I said earlier, a female avatar of the Shiva energy, a specific manifestation named Kali. And she sometimes does rituals where she embodies herself as Kali, the Suridetha. But this was not that day. This was just her being her. And he started walking me away to, like, rush me out of there so I could go catch my bus. And I started staggering, and I turned to him and I said, hey, I think I just need to stand still for a moment. Can you find a safe place to stand me so that I can just stand still for a minute? And he said, sure. And he, like, moved me out of the flow of traffic of people. And I think it was, like, next to a bookseller or something. And I just stood there and closed my eyes and went internal, like went into a meditative state immediately. And this is the only time in my life this has ever happened to me specifically. When I closed my eyes, I was suddenly in an infinite dimensional awareness. So I don't know if any of you have ever had this experience where when you close your eyes against the physical world of appearances and normal reality, ordinary mind, there's like an infinite realm in which all of this is taking place, right? Like all of the physical matter, the particles, the atoms, the neutrons, the electricity, magnetism, and all that stuff is happening within a field of infinite potential. I've talked about it before in some of the guidance things I've done when you, like, listen to silence, because you know that behind all of the noises that are happening, there's always a field of silence in which all of the noises appear. That's a very easy way to access this realm, to understand that. It's kind of a truth you can get behind, right? All behind all these noises, there's silence. So in all of this stuff, the particles in the air, the pollen, the oxygen, there is emptiness. And you can tap into that emptiness and kind of access all of time and space and all realms of existence through that, because that's closer to the ultimate truth of reality. I think that at least that's kind of the realm that I would describe as Akash. So I close my eyes and I find myself instantly in Akash. And again, this is not words. This is not, so I'm going to use words like I heard someone say to me, but that's not what I mean. It's something way beyond what can be expressed in words. But I'm in this realm of Akash, and I hear someone say to me or communicate somehow, and I look up, and there's like a crack in the ceiling of the universe, like any realm of existence in which I could perceive, which I'm already outside of normal mind, being in the realm of Akash. It's like there's a crack in the sky. So imagine if you look up and the sky was cracked open, but you didn't see the space through it. You didn't see like stars and galaxies. You saw like an entirely other aspect of being or another realm. And there's this infinitely large being looking down at me, who I immediately recognize. I don't know who they are, but I mean, I'm familiar with them. I'm like, oh, hi. What are you doing here? You know, kind of like, oh, wow. And it says to me, or she says to me, because it was probably Kali, she says to me, I want to help you, and I need your permission. You have to give me permission to access your body so that I can help you. Do I have your permission? And I was like, oh yeah, okay, of course. This is all done without words, but this is the translation. So I give her permission, and it's like an infinite hand reaches down into my body, or the space or the energy vortex that is my body, and starts rearranging things. It's really hard to describe what that feels like. Ladle stirring the cauldron of existence, rearranging the particles of essence of self. I have no idea. But it happens for an infinite amount of time, or 2 seconds, I don't know. And then she's like, okay, thank you. I love you. We're done. And I was like, okay, thanks. And I just kind of like opened my eyes and I'm like, okay, thanks. Yeah, I got to go get on that bus. And he's like, you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. Thanks. Okay. And I go and I get on the bus, and things happen, and the summer happens, and things happen. And I'm telling stories to people like I always do. But what I found during the next like 6 months was, no matter what story I told, like oh, there's cockroaches in my apartment, but I have such a nice apartment and I'm so grateful to have my apartment. Or, yeah, I haven't been making any money for months right now, but I'm just so grateful to be in New York City, and the year's been so nice. I keep meeting really nice people. There's a guy who's a friend of mine. He's a total fucking nutcase and he's driving me crazy, but I'm just so grateful to be able to spend time with him. And I kept hearing myself saying things. Oh, my friend is dying of cancer, but I'm so grateful to be able to be with him and help him and talk to him. And I keep hearing myself say things like this. And I'm like, I have never in my life been like this. I've always wanted to be like this. I've always thought it would be a good idea, but never in my life have I been able to achieve being like this. How did this happen? I noticed it was a big difference from the way that I usually was, and although I esteemed it, I didn't take any credit for all of a sudden being this way, nor did I associate it with the Amma experience throughout the year. I just kept noticing it every time. I was like, but I'm so grateful for all of the benefits in my life. I'm just so lucky that this is happening. And it's such a fortunate occurrence. And I'm so, it was really amazing. And it felt so good. My heart was like a singing vortex of glory all the time. And even when I get upset or depressed or something, all it took was for me to talk to someone, and this like gratitude and joy and peace would just emanate out. And I was like, what the fuck? It was nice because it was so confusing. It was mysterious, and yet it was real. It was really happening repeatedly. The normal occurrences of self were continuing to happen, and then constantly were mitigated, augmented by these feelings of gratitude, peace, and joy. Again, I didn't associate this with the Amma experience. And at the end of the summer, autumn, my friend Tony and I went up to Omega Institute to see John of God, who was doing a retreat thing up there for, away from Brazil. And I had met Tony at John of God in Brazil, and I liked the experience I had at John of God. So I thought this would be cool to encounter him again. But in the healing session at John of God, I was trying to channel all of the energy I could to help Leo, my friend who was dying of cancer, to let him be at peace with his death process, because I felt like he wasn't, or to somehow heal him. And then all of the people in my life, whatever, I was trying to receive the goodness of the healing from John of God and share it with all people. And it smashed up against some memory of the Amma thing. And it was like the gods fought, because John of God is very Jesus, God, Christian oriented, and obviously the Amma, the Shiva deities have a different story going on. Not that they need to fight, but they could. And something happened that totally broke that state of grace. I was in a 6-month state of grace, and it ended abruptly after this John of God experience. And it was only then that I was like, holy shit, that was that Amma thing. I had somehow been interacted with by an Indian god, an Indian deity, and she helped me for some reason, or no reason, but it was like I had a direct experience with an Indian god. When I was at John of God's in Brazil back in 2004, which you can read about in my live journal, I felt like I had a direct experience with, let's say, a version of the Christian God, because I believe there's hundreds at least of fragmented versions of what we call the Christian God, because all these Christians believe in God, but they all believe about the different versions, or there's no, but God's not Catholic, is wrong. Catholic, oh no, but the Calvins are wrong. Oh no, the Methodists are wrong. That whole thing. So I feel like he has to be fragmented, like his churches are, as a deity. And I think that the whole point of that God is that he's supposed to be beyond deities, but they've deified him. Problematic, but I'm not going to go into that right now. So it was weird. In the ending of that state of grace, I was able to recognize that state of grace. And the ending of things gives us a perspective. gives us the limitations of something, the frame of something allows us to see it clearly, more clearer. So I guess that was 2 stories for the price of 1. You know, me like manifesting as a sannyasi and being an effigy of a saint for a family to bless themselves with by making a sacrifice or being kind, being generous, being a good host, allowing myself to be an archetype of a guest for them in their culture, even though I'm just a white guy. Oh, and by the way, when I walked out of the Indian restaurant, I was only walking for another 10 minutes before somebody picked me up. You know, before it got dark, right? It was getting dark. The sun had set, but it was still twilight. And like 10 minutes after the Indian restaurant, someone picked me up and drove me down to the train station in Poughkeepsie, and I got into New York City, no problem. That's that story. The next story was, look here. Oh, where's the check mark? Oh, green check mark. Was 71. Who is that chosen by? Thom? It was 117 by Frank, 71 by Thom. So 71... What? Huh. So I made an error in making this list. Again, I put numbers on this list. Do I have names in there that are going to be... I put numbers on this list just to make this something I could use in a random number generator. And apparently I skipped from 70 to 80. And 80 might have also been 45. It's not perfect. I've never gone through and perfected it. When I started doing this again a couple weeks ago, I was like, I should really read through that list and organize it by, content or theme or something. But there's no 71. Sorry, Thom. I would give you 80 as a pretend 71, but I think I've already just told 2 stories for the price of 1 with another story beforehand. So we're going to skip to 127. Yeah, there's no 70s. There's 70, and then it goes directly to 80. I guess I'm bad with numbers sometimes. Certainly bad with continuity. Not my strong point. Not bad, just not my strong point. 127 from Kenneth. Dzogbear. Oh. It's a nice story. When I was 15, Tom's like, what? I got ripped off, man. You can, if you feel like you need another story after this one, Thom, you can ask me another number. Just don't put it anywhere in the 70s, unless you want 70. 70 exists, but everything 71, 79 doesn't exist. What can I say? The mystery of the world. So 127, Dzogbear, we'll call it. When I was 15, I got on AOL. Being the internet addict that I am, I spent many, many hours in AOL chat rooms. This only lasted for a couple months because my parents got a bill of like $500 or $700 or something insane, like AOL back in those days, and forbid me from using AOL anymore. But in that time period, I met a gay guy who lived in New York City, who I'm still kind of in touch with. He's a musician. He was friends with Genesis Peorage. I thought he was so cool. He had a really deep voice. He talked to me on the phone a few times. We did some late night phone calls. They weren't sexy phone calls, though. It was very like I was 15. He was, what was he, probably in his 30s or 40s? I don't know. I thought he was old. He was daddy. He sounded very daddy. And I thought he was like a wizard, a magician. I was really into, Aleister Crowley, blah, 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 blah. When I finally got to New York, when I tried to meet him, he showed absolutely no interest in me. He said, I have a new boyfriend now, so I'm really obsessed with him. I'm giving him all of my attention. However, the boyfriend that I was with at the time when we met on AOL would really like to meet you. He's always thought you were fascinating, and here's his number, you can call him. So I called him, and he's dead now, so I guess I could say his name. Kevin, we'll just say his name. So Kevin, he used the name Dzogbear online, DZOG Bear. Because remember when all the bears would come up with bear names? Like, I'm Broadway Bear, I'm Spice Bear. Bears, they give themselves bear names. So he was Dzogbear because he had been practicing Dzogchen. Now, he had also practiced a lot of dark magic, and he had also been a heroin addict and a drunk most of his life. He took me to a AA meeting. It's the only time I've ever been taken to an AA meeting. So it was really cool to go and listen to him do his AA thing and listen to other guys do their AA thing. And I know it was right after I had gotten Reiki attunement, so I'm sitting there listening to people suffering and trying to beam all this healing energy at them. I'm oh my God, your life has been so hard. I'm so sorry you've had to suffer all this. This is an important part of the story. Sitting there in AA and trying to heal all these people. And the AA that he took me to was in a prison, I think, or a halfway house or something like that. It was definitely men that were having a harder life than the average drunk. Every drunk has a hard life, but, the average drunk was different than somebody who's been put in prison for some problem. So Kevin has a lot of tools, spiritual tools. I remember he's the first person who did a 4 pillars of astrology thing for me, and he mapped out I guess the 10-year luck cycles, and he's oh, you're gonna have a lot of bad luck, but every once in a while some really good luck. And I was oh, that doesn't sound good. But he was really pretty fucking magical. He was a Libra, and he had an apartment down in the East Village, so it all just seemed really, really magical. I don't remember what the sex was between us. What age was I at this point? 21 or 22? I do remember one of the first things he said to me. He's dude, what's with Did he use the word chorus? He was what's with the chorus? And I was what do you mean, what's with the chorus? I don't know what you're talking about. He's I know that people need spirit guides and stuff. I've met a lot of people that have spirit guides, but you have a huge fucking amount of spirits traveling around with you. Why do you have so many spirits? And I was I don't know what you're talking about. He was a psychic in the way that he could see other dimensions and beings in other dimensions, and I thought that was really cool, but I don't have that ability, and I didn't have that ability then either, and I was just really? I have lots of spirits around me? And occasionally he would talk to them or tell them to shut up. But there were some really cool events that happened when I was staying with him that summer. I stayed with him for a month or two. He took me, we hung out with David Tibet. He was really good friends with David Tibet. Do any of you kids know who David Tibet is? He had a band called Current 93, which that probably won't clarify anything for anybody who doesn't know who David Tibet is. But again, if I want you to think in terms of these are people who personally know Genesis P-Origin and David Tibet. I remember we had tea with David Tibet in Tompkins Square Park, and David Tibet and I had a conversation about different types of green tea. And David Tibet invited us to go to a music performance of this boy he was in love with that he had been championing, and he got him a show at, I believe, what was before Joe's Pub, as attached to the Public Theater. I think that's where it was, and it was a guy who went by the name Anthony. It was Anthony Hegarty, and it was him and 4 cellists or something, and I thought the guy was absurd, Anthony Hegarty. It took me many years to be able to appreciate any of his music because I thought the guy was a fucking nightmare. And the fact that David Tibet was just so obsessed and in love with him, I thought it was kind of embarrassing. But that's not the story I'm telling, sorry. So it's a summer in New York. My relationship with New York has always been, had always been, I'm always been someone who's been hungry for another world outside of the normal world. I've always wanted I've always wanted the overlords of the spiritual realm to be able to, I don't know, beam me up, Scotty, get me out of this fucking shit show. And, well, that's better, right? Yeah, as a teenager, 20-year-old, I was so desperate to get out of the ordinary world. So, like, I read into people who told me they were part of the Illuminati and shit like that. I was on the train, the 1-9, going up to visit this guy who had told me he'd been a part of the Golden Dawn, who had kind of been a lover of mine for a while, but it was all very fraught. I won't go into that whole story right now. But I remember being on the subway train and looking at everybody, and I guess I didn't use this word at that point, I'm very sure, but it was probably the first point in my life when I started valuing what we'll call compassion, and I was trying to practice compassion. Or I was an already compassionate being who was being aware of being compassionate for the first time in my life. Instead of being scared of people or angry at people or hungry for people, I was just looking at people on the subway and noticing how much suffering they were doing right there in front of me. Like nowadays when we have smartphones and we're staring at them all the time, reading stories or playing Candy Crush or whatever the fuck we're doing, it's even easier to ignore other people's suffering. But in the days before that, sometimes you could just stand on the train and look at people, and you could see how tired they were, and you could see how sad they were. And if you were a sensitive person, you might be able to like understand how hopeless they felt about money or love or their future or their next breath or the just day-to-day existence. And I remember having this moment where I'm looking at all these people on the New York subway and they just look so tired and so exhausted. You know, all this diversity, these different people of different colors, the struggle of being an American, the struggle of being a human, the struggle of being a New Yorker. And I noticed that most of them are touching the bars. You know, there's metal bars all over the subway that you hold on to while the subway channels through space. I know this was the 1-9 because I know we were above ground, around the 125 station, I believe. I remember the sunlight. And I remember seeing all the suffering and noticing that all these people were like holding the metal bars. And I thought, you know, I could hold the metal bars and I could connect to every person on this train and I could send them healing. And my friend Dzogbear, like one of the practices of Tibetan Buddhism, which Dzogchen comes from, is a practice called Tonglin. And Tonglin, Allen Ginsberg had also talked about it, and I was kind of obsessed with Allen Ginsberg in those years as well. And I believe Kevin and I had a conversation about Tonglin, or at least maybe the energy had just kind of osmosis. But Tonglin is a practice where you breathe in the suffering of the world and transform it into beauty and peace and love and joy and kind of radiate it out. So I decided that I could hold on to a metal bar in each hand, you know, one on one side, like the central bar in front of the doors, and then in the other hand, the bar that connects to the seats. And this was when the 1-9 trains were the old red trains, if you remember those. And I could touch almost everybody physically in the train, of course. And there's a whole bunch of fallacies on this level. But for one thing, I was trying to do it myself, which is not how you Tonglin. You have to like not have a self in order to Tonglin properly. But I didn't understand that. And when you're doing energy work, you don't actually need a physical connection with people, so it didn't matter if I was touching the bars. But the idea was that I connected to each person who was touching the metal bars on the train, or somehow connected to the metal, and I channeled their suffering into my body and transformed it into love and joy and healing, and then channeled it back out through the metal bars into every person there. So it's hard to describe how one does this, but I did it. You know, I did it. I felt all the energy coming into me, into my heart, into my lungs, into my body, and then I transformed it and I shot it back out in white light, you know, and like doing Reiki, whatever. And I did it for a few minutes or 10 minutes or something as we're riding the train. And then I was incredibly fucked. I was so horribly tired and sore and cloudy, and I was like, what just happened? So I get back to Kevin's house, and again, he has this nice like psychic perception. He's like, what happened to you? And I told him what I tried to do, and he was like, you can't do that. That's not something you can do. I mean, not now, not like this, not like, no, that's, you completely had a misunderstanding about that teaching or what he was like, that's very sweet, but that you can't do it like that. And I got so fucking sick. I was just like, for like 2 weeks, he was doing like weird shamanistic shit over me where he was like, you know, smudging me, and I don't think I'd ever had anybody do that, like smudge me with bird wings and resins and playing rattles, and he had other musical instruments there because he was a musician, and he played some things and he chanted for me and he fucked me. He made like, so I do remember that aspect of the sex, that like he did like really adept healing work while fucking me. It was really great. But it was really cool to like, this person who I didn't know took me into his apartment in the East Village and gave me all sorts of wisdom transmissions, healing, physical care, energy. And I guess the like spiritual aspect of this is like understanding the difference between witnessing people suffering and trying to fix it. Like trying to fix it is not how you do Tonglin. Trying to fix it is not how you make the world a better place, at least not me. And certainly not from a sense of self. You know, I can't say that I had some ego trip going on, although I probably did. I definitely did. I can't say that I wanted to heal everybody on the subway because it would make me an awesome person. Oh shit, the internet's dropping. Yeah, I can't say that I wanted to do it because it would make me an awesome person to heal all these people, but I just wanted to do it because I saw the suffering. It was a really honest impulse. But I didn't have the ability to separate my sense of self from the transformational. Like, if you are a being that isn't a self, but understand yourself as an aspect of the whole of existence, that's how you Tonglin. And anyway, I didn't have that ability. And I'm so grateful that someone was there to take care of me. That, again, like, I think one of the important parts of this story is understanding that somebody who has that impulse can, in reality, seriously fuck themselves up. So if you're just doing a mental exercise, then it wouldn't make an impulse. It wouldn't make an impact. But if you're really interacting with the physical, you know, connecting with the hearts and minds and karma of all these people on the train and then trying to take it on and free them from it, that's a little bit more than the average person can do. And I'm just an average guy. That's one of the like games I always like to play. I'm just an average guy. My middle name is John. It's the most average name in the world. I'm just a John. I'm just an average John. An average height, an average hair color, a very average life. So I don't know, Tom, do you think that's enough? Do you need to hear another story? Or, I mean, I guess I've been online for an hour and 20 minutes at this point, over an hour and 20 minutes, so I think that's probably enough. Do you guys need to hear anything else? Do you need me to wrap this up in a certain way? To Om, or give thanks to Leo and Kevin and Genesis Peorage, nice dead friends, our dead friends. I don't know if David Tibet's dead. Anthony, I guess, is kind of dead because that person is transformed into Anatana-Honi, or whatever, how you pronounce that. I don't know. I don't really follow them very well. But Anthony Hegarty is no more. The person is transformed. I'm glad you're okay. Okay, well, that's enough for today. I'll take you and show you the sunset a little bit more, the sunset light. Get out of my hammock. It's fun to share the hammock with you, right? Love Leo, love Genesis. Hey, Genesis. Yeah, Genesis died recently. Hi, guys. Look, it's your favorite view. Oh, look at the red clouds. It doesn't come across as vermilion as it looks. Who's Don Bolus? I don't know Don Bolus. You're welcome, Kenneth. Check out the sky. Sky, sky, sky. Shabbat Shalom, peeps. Lekker pik. Que ondas. Oh. Was he a multidimensional being, Frank? I guess everybody is. Was he involved in the black magic? He was a friend of Genesis. Was he in Psychic TV or something? So Amma's still doing her thing, obviously not in the post-COVID reality. Do people want to go get hugged by a million people, or hugged by someone who's hugging a million people? But Amma's pretty cool. No, just on the same stage. All right, well then. Oh, whoa, what is this? Your viewers. Oh, there's buttons have changed. There's a your viewers button down here now. Do you guys think we should try this in a Facebook room? Now there are Facebook rooms. Oh, that kind of does rhyme with Zoom. Facebook room. Ah, it's very clever of them. Jimmy Giorsetti. Jimmy Giorsetti, aka Don Bowles. Don Bowles. Maybe he was a member of Revolting Cocks as well. Look how pretty this is. I love this. Stop it. I love the churning of the sea. All right, good night, everybody. Thank you for your attention. And I hope you enjoyed this evening's storytelling. And I hope you're having a wonderful Friday. Pretty soon we'll all be free, right? Pretty soon we'll all be free. Love you. Good story. I've never listened to the Germs. Maybe I'll check some out. I don't think I'm at the time in my life to appreciate it, but I'll still check it out. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Thom. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, everybody who's here. Much love to you. Ciao.